Do you remember your first nightmare? Your first encounter with gripping terror, the primal rush of fear, jolting awake in a cold sweat in the murky depths of night, unsure if the bone-chilling dread you felt was real or not. Even after all of these years, the memories of my first nightmare have clawed at the edges of my consciousness, a constant reminder of the deep, hidden horrors that lurk within the outskirts of the dream world. I wandered the halls of my childhood home in the chilling silence of the night. My footsteps softly creak on the hardwood floors. Moonlight loomed ominously in the halls as I wandered down the long corridors. The walls and windows extended high above me, towering over my young figure. The hallways stretched out in each direction, far longer than they should have. I couldn't find any rooms, or doors, or exits, just long corridors. I was lost within my own home. My surroundings looked so close to the familiar world I knew, but in my dream state, they were distorted and slightly off-putting. I looked down at my hands, and they were covered in thick black ink. I don't know the origin of this wet slime that covered my hands, or how my fingers became covered in it. With each step down the dimly lit hallway, my sense of unease and confusion grew. At the time, it all seemed so real to me, so I kept walking, hoping to find an exit, or at least a way to clean my dirty hands. Then, I finally saw it, a closed wooden door at the end of the hall, beckoning me with a silent, eerie invitation. This door was unfamiliar, standing out in the house I had known so well, its dark wood exuding an aura of foreboding as I approached cautiously. I felt a sense of unease within me. Every instinct screamed to leave this door untouched, to turn back and find another way. Yet, in the labyrinth of corridors, it seemed the only escape. I reached up for the doorknob, stretching my childlike arms as high as they could, and slowly twisted the knob. The door opened with a creak, and I stared into a dark abyss in front of me. A set of rotting wood stairs led down into mysterious depths. It was an old, abandoned cellar, but not any basement I had seen before. In the distance, I heard the rhythmic pattern of a leaky faucet. While quiet whispers encouraged me to take my first step, I did as I was instructed. As I descended the creaking stairs, a stench of moldy rot filled my nostrils, making me grimace in disgust. Each old step creaked as if it would fall apart under my weight. Once I descended closer to the bottom, I saw this cellar for what it was. Large piles of discarded waste littered the floor, and moldy shelves filled with jars of rotting goo lined the walls. The ground had a thin layer of murky water, which seeped into my socks and drenched my feet. Everything in this room was in a state of decay and rot, decomposed to the point where it was hard to make out any specific items. On the far end of the room, past the forgotten items, a single flickering light bulb cast long, sinister shadows across the debris, painting the walls in shades of darkness. This light was emanating from an old washroom on the far end of the cellar. In the midst of this cellar, this bright washroom was like a beacon in a sea of shadows. I looked down at my filthy blackened hands. Something in the back of my mind told me I needed to wash my hands in the washroom sink. So I slowly made my way across the dingy basement to this mysterious washroom. The closer I got, it was more clear the dripping sound was coming from this room. With each step closer, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices urging me forward into the light deep within the heart of darkness. I stopped before the washroom door, bathed in the sickly glow of the flickering light bulb. Though it must have once been beautiful, it looked like this small washroom had not been used in decades. The scent of mold here was repulsive. I looked around the room. The tiles beneath my feet were slick with filth, dirt overflowing in the tile crevices. The toilet was old, cracked, and unusable. The sink was tall and imposing, and the mirror, coated in a layer of dust, reflected a dull shine of the flickering light above. On the opposite side of the room, there was an old tub covered with a thick shower curtain of an ornate floral pattern. I felt a chill run down my spine. I felt in the deepest part of my soul that something was wrong with this washroom. But as much as I did not want to step into that room, I could not resist the whispering urges that surrounded me, instructing me to clean the inky blackness off my hands. I told myself I would clean my hands and leave as soon as I could, and return to the safety of the upstairs. I grabbed a miniature stepladder nearby to reach the tall faucet. As I ran the water, the sink ran black with the ink that was falling off my hands. The ink was hard to remove, and I remember scrubbing and scrubbing as hard as I could before I made any progress. Once my hands were finally clean, I wiped a clear path through the dust on the mirror with my hands. Looking at my reflection, my eyes traced the faded floral pattern of the shower curtain behind me, with vines that twisted and turned like serpents broken up by wilted roses and sharp thorns. The pattern was so deep and complex, I found myself getting lost in the winding paths of life. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a force that reverberated through the very foundations of the house. At the same time, the lone light bulb shattered into 1,000 glittering shards with a flashing, blinding light. Soon after, the washroom was cast into a darkness that seemed to swallow the very air around it. I was shrouded in pure, utter blackness. Startled and disoriented by the sudden noise and chaos, I tumbled from the step stool, my skull colliding with the hard edge of the sink. I tumbled to the ground. My head throbbed with a relentless pain, the taste of coppery blood thick upon my tongue as it trickled down my face, obscuring my vision in a veil of crimson. For a moment, only an oppressive silence lingered, broken only by the rhythmic drip of water from the shower. I was unable to see anything in this dark void I found myself in. The foul stench of mold hung so heavy in the air, so thick I could physically taste it on my tongue. In a dreamy haze, under the blanket of darkness, every instinct I had was telling me to leave this cursed basement as fast as I could. Despite my mind's pleas, my limbs barely obeyed, as if they were pulled by an invisible force. With trembling hands and a heart filled with dread, I navigated the treacherous terrain of broken glass and dirty tile, guided only by the faintest glimmer of light that filtered through the cracks under the door. I finally felt the thick wood of the washroom door. I reached up and twisted the old doorknob and pushed as hard as I could. The rusty hinges groaned in protest as they yielded to my touch. The knob would not turn, no matter how hard I tried. As I pushed in vain against the sealed door to this washroom, I heard a sound, behind me, I'd never forget. The sound of scraping metal on the curtain rod pierced the cold silence. With a slow, deliberate movement, the shower curtain behind me began to rustle. Icy tendrils of fear crept their way down my spine and swept through my body. I was not alone in this cramped, rotten washroom. I couldn't see anything clearly in the darkness, but I could feel pure evil emanating from behind this thin curtain. I was drenched in icy horror that seeped into the very core of my being. Lurking in the shadows, concealed within the floral shower curtains, something sinister watched and waited, silently toying with me. I fell right into its trap, and there was no way out. The dread in the pit of my stomach engulfed me. I was frozen in place. A silent scream echoed through the depths of my soul. I heard that wet, dripping sound. It was getting louder. Whatever cursed being was hiding in this washroom was the source of the putrid, moldy stench that permeated the entire cellar. It overwhelmed my nostrils until I wanted to puke. The floral curtain was now wide open, and a squishing sound of slimy liquid rang out as it took its first step outside of its hiding place. I couldn't open the door. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. In the blackness of the room, I could barely make out shapes, but I saw a monstrous form slowly emerge from the shower. Its arms were skinny and elongated. It was so tall it had to stoop down to fit under the ceiling. And head to toe, it was covered in a wet, dripping filth that drooped lazily off its slender limbs, as if it was covered in rotten sewage and overgrown with weeds. Chunks of rotten mold fell off its body in thick layers now, sloppily hitting the floor with a disgusting wet slap. I wanted to scream and cry, but I couldn't do anything other than shove myself into the corner of the washroom as deep as I could bury myself. My mind was petrified to the point where I couldn't think clearly, but my entire body wouldn't do anything other than shake and tremble uncontrollably. I was terrified into a frozen silence. I couldn't even scream. The monster towered over me in the middle of the room now, and slowly crept its way towards me, one patient step at a time. The monster's reflective, cat-like eyes shone directly at mine, and we locked eyes for what seemed like an eternity. I was unable to look away. I couldn't see its mouth in the darkness, but I imagined it curled into a wicked smile of sharp teeth. It could have ripped me to shreds the moment I walked in, but I knew it savored the slow thrill of watching its hopeless prey cowering in fear. It would kill me for fun, but first it feasted on my fear with a savory delight. I wedged myself as far as I could into the corner, in a pitiful attempt to hide myself from my impending doom. The monster slowly reached out long, tendril fingers towards my head, dripping toxic goo onto the ground before it. I covered my eyes with my arms. I couldn't watch anymore. Suddenly, it gripped my arm aggressively with the raw power of an iron vice. Underneath the disgusting wet slime sliding off its body, it had an unbreakably strong grip. As soon as it made contact with me, my motionless seal of fear had been broken. I lost it. I started screaming and crying and thrashing and blubbering, flailing around like a wild animal caught in a vicious trap. Its grip was ice cold, so frigid it felt like it was searing my flesh. As hard as I tried, this beast gripped me with a strength that almost crushed my bones. It brought its face close to mine, staring directly into my eyes with a heartless, cold shimmer of malice. Its breath was inches from my face now, a foul mixture of death, mold, and rot. Cold, putrid slime was dripping off of this foul beast, dripping onto my arms and seeping through to my face. I thrashed in vain and screamed until my throat hurt, and I couldn't breathe anymore. Then I jolted awake, but I found myself lying down in my bed with my parents by my side. My sheets were strewn about as if they were violently thrown around. My parents said they had heard the screaming and ran down to investigate. I tried to tell them what happened, but they looked confused once I mentioned the cellar and the washroom. I was still stuck in a confused limbo between the dream world and the conscious. My memory was a blur. I tried to tell them again about the basement, but they both insisted we've never had a basement in this house, in an effort to calm me down. It took a few minutes of convincing until I realized it was just a dream, and it took even longer to stop hyperventilating and crying. It seemed so real, so vivid. I couldn't believe it wasn't real. Looking back, I can still remember those events so clearly, even after all these years. However, no matter how much I tell myself over and over it was nothing more than a nightmare, I don't know if I'll ever be truly convinced, because as long as I can remember, there's been a slight discoloration that's softly burnt onto my arm, exactly where I was grabbed all those years ago. And every now and then, as I'm on the verge of sleep, just when my mind is drifting off into a deep slumber, I can still hear that drip, drip, drip from all those years ago.